Imagine standing on a misty battlefield in 17th century Japan, the clang of swords still echoing through the air. You see a lone warrior, calm and unshaken, walking away after another duel that has ended in his favor. This man is Miyamoto Musashi, a figure who has become legendary not only for his unmatched skill with the blade, but also for the philosophy he left behind. While the world remembers him as a master swordsman who won more than 60 duels, what is often overlooked is the wisdom he passed down in his later years, when his battles were no longer against men, but against the weaknesses of the human spirit. Before his death, Musashi wrote a short yet powerful work known as Dakad, or the Path of Aloneness. Unlike long treatises or complicated doctrines, this text contained only 21 short principles. And yet, within those principles lies a timeless guide to living with courage, discipline, and clarity. These lessons were not written for samurai alone. They were meant for anyone who wished to walk through life with purpose and independence, regardless of age, background, or era. Think about the world we live in today, full of noise, distraction, and endless desires. Everywhere we turn, we are told to chase after more possessions, more status, more approval from others. But Musashi's teachings cut through all of this like the edge of a sharp blade. He reminds us that strength is not only measured on the battlefield, but in how we carry ourselves each day, how we manage our desires, how we face hardships, how we walk our chosen path even when no one else believes in it. His words are as relevant now as they were 400 years ago, and in many ways, perhaps even more. In this video, we are going to explore these 21 lessons in depth. We'll uncover what they meant for Musashi, but more importantly, what they can mean for you and me in today's world. It's from the courage to face difficulties head-on, to the discipline of living simply, to the wisdom of embracing change without fear. Each lesson is a reminder that true power lies not in conquering others, but in mastering ourselves. So, if you're ready to step into the mind of a warrior who became a philosopher, if you're curious about how ancient wisdom can help guide modern life, you're in the right place. Stay with me until the end, because some of these lessons may surprise you, and others may completely change the way you see your daily struggles. And before we dive in, I'd love to invite you to join this journey with us. If you enjoy stories of history, philosophy, and timeless wisdom that can still inspire us today, make sure to like this video, share it with others who may need it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story we bring to life. Your support means a lot and helps us continue creating content that connects the past with the present in a way that truly matters. Now, let's begin the path of aloneness, the way of Miyamoto Musashi. When Musashi reflected on the first lesson of his path, he did not simply speak about turning away from pleasure for the sake of hardship, or rather about something far deeper, the pursuit of truth as the guiding force of one's existence. He understood that pleasure is fleeting, like the morning mist that vanishes as the sun rises, but truth is enduring, steady, like the mountain that remains long after storms have passed. To seek truth means to dedicate yourself to a life of meaning, to live in such a way that every action, every decision, and every moment is aligned with a greater purpose instead of being consumed by the endless search for comfort or distraction. Musashi himself could have chosen an easier life after his victories, indulging in recognition, wealth, or the admiration of others. Yet he walked away from all of it, withdrawing to solitude, where he sharpened not only his sword, but also his spirit, teaching us that true fulfillment comes not from the pleasures we gather, but from the integrity with which we walk our chosen path. In our own world, the temptation to chase comfort is constant. We are surrounded by promises of quick happiness, new possessions, fleeting amusements, temporary escapes, but Musashi's words remind us that none of these will anchor us when life shakes us to our core. What steadies us is truth, the truth of who we are, the truth of what we value, and the truth of the life we wish to build. To seek truth is not easy, because it often demands discipline, sacrifice, and the courage to look within ourselves honestly. Yet, it is only through this pursuit that we find something lasting, something that no passing pleasure can provide. Musashi's lesson calls us to rise above the surface of life and reach for depth, to build a foundation that cannot be taken away by changing circumstances, to live with the awareness that while pleasures fade, a life lived with purpose creates a legacy that endures. Musashi's next teaching turns our attention to the quiet chains that so often bind human beings, the invisible threads of desire that pull us in directions we may not even choose for ourselves. He warns against being controlled by material possessions, wealth, or cravings, not because such things are inherently evil, but because they hold the power to enslave the spirit when we allow them to define our worth or dictate our actions. In his own life, Musashi could have surrounded himself with fine silks, precious metals, and the comforts of the court after countless victories, yet he deliberately chose a different path, walking through villages with little more than his 2 swords, his brush, and the discipline of his mind. This was not poverty born of circumstance, but a deliberate refusal to let possessions possess him. A way of living that proved his freedom was absolute because it could never be purchased or stolen. For us, the lesson is just as urgent, though our world may look different from Musashi's. We live in an age where desire is magnified by constant reminders of what we do not yet have, where the glitter of possessions or the thrill of new indulgences promises happiness but often delivers emptiness. To detach from desire does not mean renouncing every comfort or turning away from the beauty of the world. Rather, it is about refusing to let those things master us, about understanding that wealth and objects are tools to serve life, not measures of who we are. When we live in this way, we discover a kind of strength that cannot be shaken, a quiet independence that allows us to stand firm whether fortune smiles or frowns. And in that independence lies the same freedom Musashi carried with him, a freedom no craving could ever control. There is a certain stillness that comes when one begins to understand impermanence, a clarity Musashi himself carried like a hidden blade. He saw that life and death were not opposites to be feared, but 2 parts of the same rhythm, a natural flow that no man, no matter how skilled or powerful, could resist. To cling to life with desperation or to shudder at the thought of death was, in his eyes, a weakness that clouded judgment and dulled the edge of one's spirit. On the battlefield, this truth was not philosophical, but practical. For the warrior who fought with fear in his heart was already defeated before the duel had even begun. Musashi, walking into each fight as if it might be his last, was liberated by that acceptance, free to act without hesitation, because he had already released himself from the grasp of fear. In our own time, though our battles may not be fought with steel, the same lesson resonates. We cling so tightly to what we cannot hold: youth, possessions, even moments of happiness, as if grasping hard enough could keep them from slipping through our fingers. Yet Musashi reminds us that everything flows, that change is the only constant, and that to resist it is to suffer needlessly. When we embrace impermanence, we begin to live more fully, savoring each breath, not because it will last forever, but because we know it will not. We find courage not in denying death, but in walking forward with the awareness that life is precious precisely because it ends. And in this way, Musashi's wisdom extends beyond the battlefield, teaching us that strength is not found in defiance of mortality, but in harmony with it. In learning to move like water through the ever-changing stream of existence, Musashi's path was never one of comfort or excess, but of restraint shaped by the steady weight of discipline. For he knew that indulgence clouds the mind and weakens the body, while self-control sharpens both. In the long years of wandering, when food was scarce and shelter uncertain, he trained himself to live with little, to let hunger become a teacher rather than an enemy, and to use hardship as the whetstone upon which his will was honed. He did not seek luxury, nor did he allow his desires to dictate his choices. Because he understood that mastery was born not from abundance, but from control, from the ability to command oneself when the world demanded surrender. His victories were not only against opponents with blades, but against the temptations within. For each moment of moderation and restraint became a quiet triumph that made him unshakable. When the time for real battle came, in the lives we lead today, though the arenas are different, the struggle remains much the same. The world offers endless opportunities to indulge, to eat beyond need, to rest without purpose, to waste time chasing small pleasures, but the cost of giving in too often is the dulling of our strength, the erosion of the discipline that allows us to stand tall when challenges rise. Musashi's lesson urges us to practice moderation, not as denial of life's joys, but as a way of keeping our edge, reminding us that true freedom lies not in doing whatever we want, but in having the power to choose wisely, to resist what weakens us, and to cultivate habits that strengthen both body and spirit. In learning to master ourselves in small, daily acts of discipline, we prepare for the greater trials that life inevitably places before us. And like Musashi, we discovered that the greatest weapon is not the sword we carry, but the unyielding control we hold over our own mind and will. There is another lesson Musashi carried with him, one that is often overlooked but quietly essential: the art of avoiding obsession. He had seen with his own eyes how warriors lost their way, not because of weakness in skill, but because of fixation in an enemy, possession, or even a single technique, until their entire world narrowed and their judgment collapsed. Musashi himself refused to be bound by any single weapon, style, or attachment, choosing instead to adapt fluidly, to pick up whatever tool the moment required, and in doing so, he became impossible to predict. To him, obsession was a cage, beautiful perhaps in its familiarity, but still a prison that limited vision and stole freedom. His strength came from staying unattached, ready to shift, to move, to change, because he knew that clinging too tightly to one thing meant losing the balance that life demanded. In our own lives, the same trap lies waiting. We often believe that if we hold on to one person, one goal, or one dream with all our strength, then happiness or success will surely follow. Yet the world does not bend itself to our grip, and the harder we cling, the more painful it becomes when life inevitably shifts beyond our control. Musashi's wisdom suggests a different path: to love without possession, to work with devotion but without chains, to live with passion yet remain free enough to change direction when the flow of life requires it. Obsession, whether with wealth, recognition, or even a single idea of who we must be, can blind us to opportunities waiting just beyond our narrow focus. But when we learn to loosen our hold, to walk forward without fear of letting go, we begin to experience the same freedom Musashi wielded, a freedom that allows us to adapt, to remain unshaken by change, and to move through life with the strength and grace of one who is never trapped by what they cannot keep. Musashi also understood the corrosive weight of envy and resentment, for on the path of the warrior there were always rivals, right? Always whispers of who had more skill, more fame, or more fortune. Yet he refused to waste his spirit measuring himself against another man's shadow. He knew that to compare endlessly was to chain one's worth to something outside of control, and to let jealousy take root was to carry poison in the heart, weakening resolve long before stepping onto the battlefield. Instead, he looked inward, shaping his focus not on what others possessed or achieved, but on whether he himself had walked further on the path than he had the day before. In this way, each duel, each hardship, each quiet moment of training became a contest, not with others, but with the lingering limits within his own soul, and that contest could never be stolen or defined by anyone else. For us, the lesson remains just as vital, though the arenas we walk are often made of daily struggles, ambitions, and the silent comparisons we carry when we look at the lives of those around us. The world constantly invites us to measure ourselves against others, someone richer, more accomplished, more admired. But Musashi's wisdom reminds us that this is a distraction that steals energy from what truly matters. Resentment burns slowly, but it eats away at peace, and envy blinds us to our own progress, making victories feel hollow because they are always weighed against another's story. If instead we choose to direct that same energy inward to cultivate patience, skill, and inner strength, then comparison loses its grip and anger fades like mist in the morning sun. Musashi teaches us that freedom lies not in surpassing others, but in mastering ourselves, and that the true measure of a life is not how we stand next to another, but how we walk forward on our own path, free from the chains of jealousy, clear-eyed and steady in pursuit of growth that belongs to us alone. Musashi's journey was marked not by the glitter of riches or the comfort of soft living, but by a life stripped down to what was essential. For he recognized that simplicity was not a burden, but a source of strength. He carried little as he wandered from place to place, his possessions often no more than the clothes on his back, the tools of his trade, and the discipline etched into his spirit. To him, unnecessary luxuries were distractions that dulled awareness, pulling the mind toward comfort when it should remain sharp and ready. In simplicity, he found freedom, because the fewer chains one carried, whether material or emotional, the lighter the steps became that cleared the path appeared before him. His battles, his teachings, his very way of being, all reflected this philosophy that a straightforward life allowed the heart to focus on what truly mattered, unclouded by the endless chase for more. And though our world looks vastly different from his, the essence of this wisdom remains unchanged. Modern life tempts us with abundance at every corner, urging us to buy, to collect, to believe that happiness lies in accumulation. Yet how often do these things only weigh us down? We find ourselves working endlessly for what we do not truly need, filling our homes and hearts with clutter, and wondering why contentment always seems just out of reach. Musashi's call to live simply is a reminder that clarity comes not from adding more, but from letting go of the excess that distracts us from purpose. A straightforward life is not a lesser one. It is a deliberate choice to walk unburdened, to savor the quiet joys, and to cultivate a strength that does not depend on possessions, but on character. In learning to reject what is unnecessary, we discover that the greatest luxury is freedom itself, and the richest life is one lived with focus, discipline, and peace of mind. Musashi's life was also a testament to the quiet, enduring power of self-reliance, for he had long understood that true strength could never be borrowed, nor could it be given by another. It had to be forged within. From his earliest days, wandering without a master, choosing the uncertain path of a ronin instead of the safety of serving under a lord, he carried with him the belief that dependence weakens the spirit, while independence steals it. In countless duels, he stood alone, with no army at his back, no patron to shield him, and no one to answer for his failures but himself. That solitude was not emptiness, but empowerment, for in leaning fully on his own resolve, he discovered a strength that could not be taken away. To Musashi, the reliance on others for one's sense of worth, stability, or survival was a fragile foundation, easily broken, while the reliance on one's own discipline, courage, and will was unshakable, a fortress built from within. In our own lives, this lesson shines with equal clarity. Even if the challenges we face are not duels with blades, but battles with uncertainty, hardship, or doubt, it is tempting to lean too heavily on others for answers, to believe that someone else will guide us, save us, or provide what we lack. Yet, Musashi's way reminds us that the truest power comes from cultivating the ability to stand firm on our own. This does not mean isolating ourselves or rejecting the bonds we share with others, but it does mean building an inner core strong enough that we are never helpless when those bonds shift or when support is absent. When we rely on ourselves first, the help of others becomes a gift, not a crutch, and our independence allows us to walk any path with confidence. Musashi shows us that in the end, the most reliable weapon we carry is not in our hands, but in our spirit, and that the person we can always depend upon must be the one we see in the mirror. Musashi's philosophy also carried with it a profound lesson about time and memory, for he knew that to chain oneself to regrets was to fight battles that could never be won. In the course of his life, he endured defeats, endured hardships, and surely made choices that weighed heavily on him. Yet he refused to let the past consume his spirit. A warrior who steps onto the field while looking backward cannot see the strike that comes before him. And in the same way, a man dwelling endlessly on mistakes is already defeated by shadows. Musashi moved forward with an unwavering gaze, carrying lessons from his past, but never dragging the weight of regret. Understanding that every error was not a prison, but a teacher, and that strength was born not from perfection, but from the courage to rise again without hesitation. In our own world, it is easy to fall into the trap of replaying what has already been written, of revisiting moments we cannot change until they drown out the present. We replay failures, missed opportunities, words we wish we had said differently, and in doing so, we sacrifice the life unfolding right before us. Musashi's wisdom cuts through this cycle like a sharp blade, reminding us that regret is only useful if it offers a lesson, and once that lesson is taken, the memory must be released. To dwell too long is to surrender twice, once to the mistake itself, and once again to the grip of the past. If instead we choose to accept, to learn, and to let go, we reclaim our freedom to act, to grow, and to face the future with clarity. Musashi teaches that to walk forward unburdened by regret is not to deny our mistakes, but to honor them by transforming them into stepping stones, each one shaping a path stronger than the one before, a path where the weight of yesterday never steals the strength of today. Musashi's journey also reveals that hardship was not something to be feared or avoided, but rather embraced as the crucible where true strength is forged. His life was shaped by countless trials, wandering without a master, sleeping beneath the open sky, surviving battles where one mistake meant death, and yet, instead of resisting suffering, he welcomed it as a companion on the path. He understood that comfort breeds softness, while struggle tempers the spirit like steel and fire, each challenge burning away weakness until only resilience remains. When others sought ease, he walked toward difficulty, knowing that growth was hidden within discomfort, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving forward despite it. In our time, though we may not face the same fields of combat, the essence of this truth still applies. For hardship comes to every life and forms both great and small loss, failure, uncertainty, or the daily weight of responsibilities that test our patience and resolve. It is tempting to see these moments as punishments or unfair burdens, but Musashi's wisdom urges us to view them instead as opportunities, as the very ground upon which strength is built. To accept challenges with courage is to refuse to be broken by them, to let each struggle shape us into something more capable, more aware, and more enduring. The road of growth will never be smooth, but it is precisely the rough stones beneath our feet that teach us balance, resilience, and clarity. Musashi shows us that to face hardship bravely is not to deny the pain it brings, but to walk through it with the understanding that every step taken in courage is a step toward mastery, not just of skill, but of life itself. For Musashi, the measure of a life was never found in the applause of the crowd, nor in the fleeting approval of others. For he understood that seeking validation was a trap as dangerous as any blade. Throughout his countless duels, there were always onlookers, always whispers of admiration or doubt, yet he never let such voices decide his worth, because he knew that the moment a man begins to fight for recognition, he loses sight of the true path. His victories were not performed for an audience, but carved into his soul as proof of discipline, clarity, and mastery, and whether others praised him or condemned him mattered little. By detaching himself from the hunger for acknowledgement, he freed his spirit to move according to principle rather than performance, living with an authenticity that could not be shaken by the opinions of others. In the world we navigate today, this lesson may be even more difficult. For everywhere we turn, we are surrounded by mirrors of approval numbers, likes, compliments, or criticisms that tempt us to measure our value by what others say. The danger is subtle but powerful. The more we depend on validation, the more we surrender our freedom, shaping our choices not from inner conviction, but from the desire to be seen, admired, or accepted. Musashi's wisdom calls us back to the quieter, harder path, one where we learn to act without needing recognition, to walk steadily even when no one is watching, and to define success by the integrity with which we live, not the applause we receive. When we release the need for constant approval, we discover a deeper strength, one that cannot be taken away by silence or criticism. And in that strength lies the truest form of independence, the freedom to live, guided by our own purpose rather than the shifting judgments of the world. Musashi also recognized that mastery of the sword was meaningless without mastery of the self, and at the heart of that mastery lay control over one's emotions. On the battlefield, he had seen men undone, not by the skill of their opponents, but by their own tempers, rushing forward in anger or striking wildly in fear, leaving themselves exposed because passion clouded their vision. Musashi understood that emotions, if left unchecked, were like flames capable of burning brightly for a moment, but just as capable of consuming everything if allowed to rage without control. He trained himself to remain steady even in the most perilous moments, his heart calm as still water, his mind clear enough to see what others missed. And it was this unshakable composure that allowed him to triumph against overwhelming odds. His strength was not in denying emotion, but in refusing to be ruled by it, turning raw feeling into disciplined focus that guided his blade with precision. In our daily lives, though the battles may not involve swords, the struggle with emotion is no less fierce. Anger can drive us to say words that wound. Fear can paralyze us from taking steps we need to take, and unchecked desire can pull us down paths that lead only to regret. Musashi's wisdom urges us to pause, to breathe, and to hold ourselves steady when storms rise within, for decisions made in impulse often leave scars far deeper than those made in clarity. To control emotion is not to live coldly or without passion, but to learn to guide those powerful currents so that they carry us forward rather than drag us under. By cultivating calm and choosing reason over reaction, we not only avoid mistakes born of haste, but also discover a strength that inspires respect. For the one who governs their own spirit cannot easily be shaken by the chaos of the world. Musashi's path reminds us that true victory comes not from conquering others, but from conquering the turbulence within. A battle fought each day in silence, yet yielding a freedom greater than any outward triumph. Musashi's life also carried a quiet reminder about the weight of possessions, for he knew that the more a man clung to what he owned, the more those very things began to own him. He traveled with little more than the tools he needed, his swords, his clothing, and a few essentials, because he understood that the true value of an object was not in its price or beauty, but in its purpose. To surround himself with treasures would have meant carrying chains, and chains, no matter how fine, still slowed the steps of one who sought freedom. In battle and in life, he valued function over ownership, using what was necessary and discarding what was not, because he recognized that attachment to possessions distracted the spirit, pulling energy toward the fear of losing them rather than the strength to act without hesitation. His simplicity was not a rejection of the world, but a deliberate choice to remain unbound, to keep his spirit sharp and unclouded by the endless desire to accumulate more. Our lives today are filled with temptations that whisper otherwise, urging us to measure our worth by what we can buy, collect, and display. The house, the car, the latest possession, all of these become symbols that we guard fiercely. Yet in guarding them, we often forget that they are only tools, never the essence of who we are. Musashi's lesson urges us to step back and ask whether the things we hold so tightly truly serve us, or whether we serve them instead. When we stop clinging, when we release the fear of losing what is temporary, we uncover a freedom that cannot be purchased, a clarity that allows us to move lightly and act decisively. To live unbound by possessions is not to live without them, but to use them wisely, to honor their purpose without letting them define us, and to remember always that the strength of a life lies not in what we hold in our hands, but in the spirit we carry within. Musashi's philosophy was not only about skill and survival, but also about the unseen compass that guided every step. For he believed that a life without honor, no matter how victorious, was hollow and fragile. He had walked through countless duels where no witness could testify to his choices. Yet, even in solitude, he refused to betray his own principles, because he knew that integrity is not measured by the eyes of others, but by the quiet truth within. To act against morality, even when no one is watching, is to fracture the spirit, and a fractured spirit cannot endure the trials of life with strength. Musashi chose instead to align his actions with a deeper code, one that demanded discipline, fairness, and honesty. For he understood that mastery of the self included not only the body and mind, but also the heart, and without that unity, no man could walk the path with confidence. In the world we inhabit today, temptations often arrive in silence, offering shortcuts, hidden gains, or choices that promise benefit so long as no one notices. Yet, Musashi's wisdom reminds us that the most important audience is always ourselves, and that integrity is the foundation upon which all true strength is built. To live with honor is not about appearances or reputation, but about the knowledge that our actions reflect who we are when stripped of recognition or reward. Every decision, whether grand or small, shapes the person we become, and each choice to uphold morality, even in secrecy, strengthens a core that cannot be shaken by external judgment. Musashi's way calls us to walk with consistency, to let our lives be guided not by fleeting opportunities, but by enduring principles, and in doing so, we find a steadiness that outlasts victory, wealth, or fame. To live with integrity is to carry a sword sharper than any steel, for it cuts through doubt and deceit, leaving us free to face the world with a spirit that is whole, unbroken, and unwavering. For Musashi, the bonds we form with others were never to be taken lightly, for he understood that relationships, though capable of bringing warmth and companionship, could just as easily entangle the spirit and weaken resolve, if they were built on unhealthy attachment or the fleeting fire of desire. He had seen men of great skill and promise falter not on the battlefield, but in the quiet corners of their lives, trapped by dependence, by lust, or by the need to possess another. And in those moments, their strength dissolved faster than steel in flame. To him, true connection was not about ownership or control, nor was it about surrendering one's clarity for the intoxication of passion, but about walking beside another with freedom and respect, always remembering that one's path must remain unbroken. When he chose solitude, it was not because he despised companionship, but because he valued his independence too much to risk losing it in the chains of obsession. He knew that unchecked desire blinds judgment, and that the warrior who fights for love of pleasure or fear of abandonment is no longer guided by purpose, but by weakness. In the rhythm of life, Musashi's lesson whispers a warning: cherish relationships, and never let them bind you so tightly that you forget who you are without them. The greatest strength lies in balance, in sharing without clinging, in caring without being consumed, in walking beside others without losing sight of your own path. And for us today, his teaching carries the same weight, reminding us that the people we welcome into our lives should lift us higher, not pull us away from our principles. And that love or companionship rooted in lust, dependence, or fear is fragile and dangerous, destined to collapse under its own weight. Musashi's way asks us to guard our hearts with wisdom, to cultivate bonds that respect freedom, and to remain vigilant against attachments that corrode the spirit. To be cautious in relationships is not to live coldly or without love, but to choose with discernment, to connect deeply without surrendering ourselves entirely, and to walk through life with bonds that strengthen rather than weaken the soul. Musashi's journey shows us that the path of mastery does not end with a single victory, a celebrated duel, or even decades of success. For he understood that the moment one declares themselves complete, the blade begins to dull and the spirit begins to wither. He carried within him a restless hunger, not for fame or recognition, but for growth itself, always seeking to refine his technique, sharpen his mind, expand his understanding of the world around him. Even after defeating countless opponents, he did not fall into the trap of arrogance, because he knew that every encounter, every mistake, every moment of stillness held within it another lesson waiting to be uncovered. To Musashi, learning was not confined to the sword, stretched into art, philosophy, strategy, and the quiet study of nature, for wisdom revealed itself in brushstrokes and river currents just as much as in combat. This relentless pursuit of knowledge carried him far beyond the battlefield, shaping him into a man who could carve wisdom into wood, ink, and words, leaving behind lessons that transcended his era. He teaches us that life itself is a school without walls, where every challenge, every loss, every fleeting triumph can either harden us into pride or humble us into curiosity, and it is the latter that leads to true strength. To live as Musashi did is to walk a path where learning never ends, where even in solitude we listen for the whispers of truth carried by the wind, where even in old age the mind bends like a young tree toward growth. For us today, his wisdom reminds us that to stop learning is to stop living fully. Key, in a world that changes with each passing season, the ones who thrive are not those who cling to what they already know, but those who remain open, willing to study, to question, and to transform. Pursuing lifelong learning means keeping our eyes sharp and our hearts humble, understanding that mastery is not a destination, but a horizon that shifts with every step we take. To continue growing, even when comfort tempts us to rest, is to honor the very essence of Musashi's path, a life of endless discovery, of relentless refinement, of walking forward with curiosity as our constant companion. In the rhythm of Musashi's reflections, there lies a quiet acknowledgement that everything in existence is bound by laws far greater than our own desires. For the seasons do not ask our permission to change. The rivers do not wait for us before carving their endless paths. And time itself moves forward with the certainty that no sword can cut through. He understood that the warrior who clings too tightly to permanence fights an unwinnable battle, while the one who learns to bend with the wind, to flow with the current, becomes unshakable, not by resistance, but by harmony. To resist the passing of days or the inevitability of loss is to exhaust one's spirit in a struggle that cannot be won. But to walk in step with nature's law is to find a strange serenity, even in moments of sorrow. Musashi's life was a living testament to this truth, for he saw men destroyed not by enemies, but by their refusal to let go of what time had already taken from them, whether it was youth, power, or fleeting glory. He chose instead to align himself with reality, to move as naturally as falling rain, to accept both triumph and defeat as threads in the same vast tapestry. The flow of existence was not something to be conquered, but embraced. And it was in this acceptance that he found the strength to continue forward without fear of what lay ahead. For us, his wisdom calls to mind the importance of loosening our grip on the illusions of permanence, to see change not as a thief, but as a teacher, to accept the slow turning of life's wheel without bitterness, when we walk with nature rather than against it, The storms no longer seem like punishments, but reminders of renewal. The aging of the body becomes less a curse and more a chapter of transformation. And even death itself loses its sting, for it is simply the final return to the same flow we have always been a part of. To accept nature's law is to find peace, not in control, but in surrender. And in that surrender lies a freedom deeper than any victory on the battlefield. In the silence between battles, when swords were sheathed and the dust of conflict had settled, Musashi carried himself not as a man intoxicated by victory, but as one who understood the fleeting nature of triumph. He never allowed himself to be consumed by boasting or to seek applause for the skill he had honed through years of relentless discipline. To him, true strength did not require the noise of recognition, because the sharpness of the blade or the steadiness of the spirit needed no confirmation from others. He saw that those who spend their lives proclaiming their greatness are often the most fragile, for their worth is tied not to what they truly are, but to how others perceive them. And when admiration fades, so too does their sense of self. Musashi's humility was not weakness, but a form of power that kept his spirit untouchable. For no insult could diminish him, and no flattery could corrupt him. His victories spoke louder than any words, and his silence carried more weight than the boasts of 100 warriors. In this way, he embodied the lesson that dignity is found not in declaring one's achievements, but in living them, in allowing actions to leave impressions deeper than any proclamation. For us, the lesson is clear. When we refrain from boasting, we protect ourselves from the trap of vanity and from the constant hunger for validation that leaves so many restless. By choosing humility, we free ourselves to focus not on how we are seen, but on who we are becoming. And in that quiet confidence lies a steadiness that no external praise or criticism can shake. True honor shines brightest when it is not shouted from rooftops, but lived day by day, in choices, in discipline, and in the strength to walk forward without demanding recognition. Musashi understood that one of the easiest ways for a warrior to weaken his spirit was to become a slave to the comforts of the body. For when meals turned into indulgence and rest became idleness, the sharpness of both blade and mind began to dull. He treated food as fuel, never as a source of distraction or escape. And in doing so, he preserved the clarity that allowed him to face life with unclouded judgment. He knew that when pleasure in eating takes priority over necessity, discipline falters, and the person who lives only to satisfy appetite will find himself chained, unable to endure hardship when comfort is stripped away. To Musashi, the simple act of eating was part of training, a daily reminder that survival is maintained by balance, not excess, and that strength of character is sharpened by moderation rather than indulgence. This perspective carries a lesson far beyond the battlefield, for it speaks to how easily we can allow comfort to become a trap. The pursuit of pleasure in food or luxury might feel harmless, but over time it can erode resilience, leaving us dependent on conditions that life cannot always provide. Musashi's approach was not about denial, but about freedom, the freedom to walk through life unbound by cravings, to endure hunger without despair, and to face discomfort without fear. When the body is kept disciplined, the mind is steadier, and the spirit remains ready to confront challenge. For us today, this teaching resonates as a reminder that true fulfillment is not found at the bottom of a feast or in the cushions of convenience, but in the strength to rise above them. To eat with purpose rather than gluttony, to rest with moderation rather than laziness, is to reclaim mastery over oneself. And in that mastery lies the kind of inner power Musashi carried into every duel, the unshakable knowledge that the body serves the spirit, never the other way around. For Musashi, life itself was not a series of scattered choices or fleeting experiments, but a single, unbroken path, a way that demanded absolute commitment. For he believed that only when one devotes every breath to discipline and self-mastery does the spirit grow unshakable. His understanding of the D was not limited to the swing of a sword or the clash of battle. It was the thread that wove through every action of his existence, from the way he trained his body to the way he sharpened his mind, from the manner in which he faced hardship to the silence with which he embraced solitude. Step onto the way meant to surrender distractions, to lay aside the temptation of half measures, and to dedicate oneself fully to the pursuit of becoming more than what one was yesterday. Musashi did not wander aimlessly between pleasures, nor did he waste himself in pursuits that led nowhere. Instead, he walked with the steady patience of one who understood that mastery is not a destination, but a lifetime of persistence. Each duel he fought, each brushstroke of ink he painted, each meditation in solitude was not an isolated act, but a continuation of that way, the visible expression of an invisible devotion. In this, he showed that greatness is never born from chance, but from a relentless return to discipline, from the refusal to betray one's own path, no matter how tempting the diversions might be. For us, his lesson is an invitation to look at our own lives and ask whether we are merely drifting from moment to moment, or whether we have chosen a way worth following. To walk the path of discipline is not to cage ourselves, but to free ourselves. For when we know where we are going and why, every sacrifice gains meaning, and every struggle becomes a stepping stone rather than a weight. To follow the way is to live with clarity, to endure with strength, and to commit to growth so fully that even in failure, we remain faithful to the journey itself. There were many moments in Musashi's life when the road stretched long and empty before him, when there was no companion at his side and no voice to encourage him forward. Yet, he never allowed solitude to become a prison. We understood that the warrior who could not endure walking alone would never discover the depths of his own strength. Companionship may bring comfort, but reliance can also weaken resolve. And so, Musashi embraced the silence of his own company as both teacher and test. To walk alone was not a mark of isolation, but of independence. It's proof that his courage was not dependent on the presence of others, that his discipline did not require witnesses, and that his identity was not defined by belonging to a crowd. He knew that those who fear solitude often seek distraction, clinging to groups, possessions, or noise to fill a void they cannot face within themselves. But in that dependency lies fragility, for when those supports are taken away, they collapse. Musashi instead chose to meet the silence with open eyes, to discover in the stillness of solitude a power that no battle could give him, the kind of strength that comes from confronting one's own heart without flinching. By learning to walk alone, he became a man who could also walk among others without losing himself, for his independence made him unshakable, whether in company or in silence. For us, this lesson resonates as a reminder that true strength is not measured by how many stand beside us, but by whether we can stand firm when no one does. It's to cultivate the ability to walk alone, even when the road feels endless. It's to gain freedom from fear of abandonment, freedom from the need for constant affirmation, and freedom from the illusion that we cannot endure without support. Solitude, when embraced, becomes not loneliness, but clarity, not emptiness, but self-discovery, and in that discovery lies the foundation of a strength that cannot be broken. As we come to the close of these timeless lessons, it becomes clear that Musashi was not simply offering guidance for warriors who wielded blades, but for every human being who must face the struggles, temptations, and uncertainties of life. His words, born from a life of conflict and solitude, not instructions chained to the past, but truths that remain as relevant now as they were centuries ago. For they speak to the heart of what it means to live with clarity, courage, and freedom. When he urged us to seek truth rather than pleasure, he was reminding us that a life guided only by comfort and fleeting satisfaction quickly loses direction, whereas a life rooted in purpose endures. When he taught the importance of detaching from desire, he revealed how easily we can become prisoners of the very things we chase, and how liberation comes not from owning more, but from needing less. Accepting impermanence, he showed, is not surrender to despair, but an embrace of the natural rhythm of existence, where change and even death are not enemies, but parts of the same eternal flow. Discipline, in Musashi's eyes, was the foundation of mastery, a steady anchor that prevents us from being swept away by indulgence or impulse. To avoid obsession, he encouraged flexibility, the ability to move lightly through life without clinging so tightly to people, places, or objects that we lose ourselves. By resisting envy and resentment, he revealed how much of our suffering comes not from what we lack, but from what we imagine others possess. And in living simply, he showed the beauty of a life stripped of unnecessary excess, where peace is found not in accumulation, but in clarity. Self-reliance, too, was at the core of his teaching, a reminder that true strength arises from within and cannot be borrowed from others. He cautioned us not to waste our days in regret, for the past cannot be undone, and every moment consumed by guilt or longing steals from the present. Instead, he called for courage in the face of hardship, a willingness to endure discomfort as a necessary companion of growth, and the refusal to run from suffering when it becomes the path to transformation. Musashi warned against seeking validation, for praise is a fleeting shadow, and those who depend on it are easily broken. He urged control over emotions, not to deny passion, but to ensure it does not rule us, for calmness and reason are far sharper weapons than rage. Possessions, he knew, could easily become chains, which is why he valued their function, but never their ownership, freeing himself from being bound by what he owned. Above all, he lived with honor, refusing to act against morality, even in solitude, proving that integrity is measured not by how we behave in public, but by the choices we make when no one is watching. His cautions about relationships were not rejections of connection, but reminders to avoid being consumed by unhealthy attachments that weaken independence. He believed in lifelong learning, a journey without end, where wisdom, skill, and perspective are always being sharpened. By accepting nature's law, he placed himself in harmony with reality itself, unafraid of time, change, or mortality, for these forces could not be conquered, but could be embraced. Humility, too, was central to his strength. He let his actions speak, never needing to boast, for greatness shines brightest when it does not demand attention. Even in the simplest aspects of life such as food and comfort, he taught moderation, reminding us to eat to live rather than live to eat, for indulgence weakens both body and spirit. He dedicated himself to the way, committing wholly to his path, his discipline, and the endless pursuit of self-mastery, proving that half-hearted devotion leads only to half-lived lives. And when the time came to walk alone, he did so without fear, for he knew that solitude, when embraced, reveals the depth of one's inner strength and the truth of one's independence. Taken together, these teachings are not fragments, but a complete vision of how to live with balance, honor, and resilience. They remind us that a meaningful life is not built upon chasing temporary comforts or external praise, but upon discipline, courage, and the unwavering choice to walk our path with clarity, whether surrounded by others or standing alone. Musashi's wisdom is an invitation, urging each of us to rise above the distractions that scatter our focus and to live with the quiet strength of one who knows that true freedom is found not in possession or pleasure, but in mastery of the self. And, with these thoughts, may you carry a sense of calm into your own journey. Let go of the noise of the day, set aside worries that no longer serve you, and rest knowing that every lesson is a step forward on your own way. May your night be peaceful, your spirit steady, and your dreams filled with quiet strength. Sleep well, and good night.